Before this video begins, I want to introduce you to a man that is crazy. His name is Gus Hansen. Now, Gus is a poker player. He plays poker for a living, and he's pretty damn good at it. But there was one day where he was in the World Series of Poker, and he had his chips down. He had to win the entire table in order to make it to the final round. So what Gus Hansen decided to do was to bluff. He decided to go all in on every single hand. Every single hand. No matter what the opponents had or no matter what he had, he decided to go all in every hand. And this absolutely paid off for him. He ended up winning the table and he went to the final round. Now you might be wondering why I started this video off with a story about a guy playing poker. Deck Driver, this makes no sense. I don't know why you would bring this up in a video about Magic the Gathering. The reason I bring up poker is because I see poker and Magic the Gathering as very similar games. In basically any card game, there's a thing called hidden information. You don't have perfect knowledge of what is going on in the board, what the opponents have, and what could potentially happen. There's a lot of most likely scenarios that you can probably think of, but in most cases, because of this hidden information, you always just need to make the best decision for you, and you gotta hope that it works out. I also see poker very similar to Magic, as it's a very social game. It's not just the cards that are playing the game, it's the people that are playing the game. And the better you can know the people that you're playing against and playing with, the better you are going to be at the game. Anybody that says Magic the Gathering players are antisocial do not know what they're talking about, because Magic is such a social game, especially EDH. So today we're talking about bluffing in Magic the Gathering and kind of the social dynamics that go along with that. So in my most recent video on combat tricks, I talked a lot about how they offer interesting and dynamic gameplay. And what I mean by that interesting dynamic gameplay is exactly this: the art and the ability to bluff your opponents and to keep them guessing at all times. Combat trick decks are a very skill expressive kind of deck, but not in the terms of how fast can I put my card down, how expensive is my card, is my deck built properly, but it's more skill intensive around the fact that you need to be able to play the mind games necessary in order to either bluff out your opponent or to beat them outright. Know when to shove, know when to hold, know when to fold. Let's take the example of the Xyris deck. The Xyris deck offers incredibly interactive gameplay in the fact of many things can happen if Xyris attacks. It also matters about how much he attacks for. So let's give this scenario. You're playing Xyris and you're attacking a player that has plenty of creatures that could potentially block Xyris. Maybe a couple 1/1 flyers. You decide to offer up a trade. I'm going to attack you with Xyris and we can both draw 3 cards. Now this is already a really cool scenario to be in, as an opponent, you might think, I can draw 3 cards, I can get more ahead, maybe I can draw into some removal so I can get rid of Xyris. But also as an opponent, you must always be thinking, well, if I just let him attack for free, this could be 7 or 8 damage coming my way. And while yes, that means I get to draw more cards, that also means he will be also drawing 8 cards and he will be that much more ahead. So in this scenario, the user decides not to block. And what happens? Xyris doesn't play a combat trick, and Xyris just gets a free 3 damage and 3 cards off of this player. Now the reason I love the dynamics of combat trick decks is because of this thought process that the opponent always has to go through. The opponent constantly has to be making decisions of, if I don't block, he might play a combat trick. If I don't block, he might not play a combat trick and he might be bluffing. If I do block, I might lose my creatures because of a combat trick. And if I do block and he doesn't have a combat trick, then I've called his bluff. These social dynamics offer so much interesting gameplay, and especially in a social format like Commander, it offers a lot of variety in each of your games. Sometimes as the combat trick player, you're gonna have it, and sometimes you're not, but you have to pretend like you do. It's just like any other Magic player holding up 2 blue mana every single turn. They might have a counterspell, and most other players will play around the fact that they might have that counterspell, but in the end, they might just be holding the 2 mana up for more protection. In many ways, this kind of bluffing can save you the game. There's many times where I hold up mana or I pretend to hold up cards that can be very important to my strategy and that can help me still stay alive when I don't even actually have those cards in my hand. But after multiple games against certain players, you start to learn other people's lists and you can kind of tell when and when they don't have certain cards in their deck. Sometimes you can just see a board state and you know what's going to happen. On the flip side though, some people always assume that you might have something, in which case you can use that to your advantage. You have no idea how many times 2 untapped islands has stopped me from doing something. Who needs a propaganda? Who needs an actual counterspell when you can just hold up 2 islands? And that's enough to stop people from attacking you, from casting spells on you, and from casting spells on your creatures. Because what happens if you do cast that Path to Exile and you have a counterspell? What happens if you do cast that board wipe and they have a counterspell? The art of bluffing in Magic offers so much amazing and in-depth gameplay, especially in a format like Commander when you multiply the players by 2. But let's move back to combat tricks. In a lot of these combat trick decks, you will be swinging out with a normal sized creature. That could be 2/2, it could be a 3/3, it could maybe even sometimes be a 2/4 or even a 4/4. In most of these cases, these cards will not win a combat on their own. However, you can get into scenarios where these cards are actually winning combats without even needing to use combat tricks, because of the fact that the other players are scared to block because you might have a combat trick. In a deck like Marisi, combat tricks are even more prevalent because your opponents can't cast spells during combat. However, at the same time, they almost always want to block Marisi because Marisi will force them to attack with all their creatures. Because of this, cards like Marisi, cards like Xyrus, and cards like Zada offer so much variety and so many hard decisions that your opponents have to go through. This in turn gives you so much advantage because it makes everyone else's game much harder to play. While you can sit there, you can bluff out your opponents, or sometimes you can just have it. Sometimes you will be attacking for 15 damage, but sometimes you might just swing in with a 1/1 creature. This depth of gameplay is what makes me love both the games poker and Magic so much. The little social cues that someone might be able to pick up on, the little tells that maybe aren't really tells because you know that might show up as tells, and so you do it on purpose. The little questions of, does he have it? Does he not have it? All are amazing parts of Magic the Gathering that I love playing, especially when it comes to combat trick decks. So let's talk about how you can actually apply this to your actual gameplay when playing these combat trick decks. A lot of times you're going to be playing a deck that has maybe 16 to 20 combat tricks when you play it. This means that you almost always will have at least one combat trick in your hand at all times. This means that in most cases, you will have it. You will have an answer to the combat, so you can almost guarantee you win. So when you swing, always try to keep your words as little as possible. The more you speak, the more you give away. So let's take Xyrus as an example. I'm going to attack a player that has 2 blockers in the air that can kill my Xyrus. I decide I don't really want to use this combat trick. I kind of just want to draw 3 cards and allow the other person to draw 3 cards because they're kind of ahead. I would say something like, I'm going to swing Xyrus your way and we can both draw 3 cards. Now, if they're not buying that and they don't want to take a lot of damage, let's say they're already at 10 commander damage, they don't want to take that damage. In this case, you and the other person are both put in quite a difficult scenario. You just really want to draw 3 cards and not have to waste your combat trick. However, they're at 10 life and they might really not want to take an extra 3 damage or potentially an extra 7 to 10 damage. If they take 11 more damage, they're dead, and they don't want that to happen. And of course, they don't know that you have a combat trick, and they don't know if you might. They don't want to take that chance. So then they might pose a couple questions to you, and you might have to talk to them about what your intentions are. But again, make sure to not give away as much as possible. Your goal is not necessarily to be sneaky and deceptive, as that can come off as maybe a little bit toxic, but to almost be as honest as possible with your intentions, but only in a certain way. You're still hiding the fact that you have a combat trick because you don't have to give them that information, but you can still just say, I want to draw 3 cards. If you keep it at that, you most likely can just get in for 3 damage and you don't have to use that combat trick. Now on the flip side, let's say you want to draw 7 cards. I would not recommend saying, I want to draw 3 cards. You would always just say, I'm attacking with Xyrus. If your intentions are good in every single time, the table will still be able to trust you and you'll still be a trustworthy person. You don't want to frame it as, I want to draw 3 cards with Xyrus and then still play your combat trick. That's deceptive. It's a little bit socially frowned upon. And also, it's going to be hard for you to gain trust in the future if you want to actually win the game. Because of that, I would say be as honest as possible with the information that you know you can share. But no oversharing, and also try not to be super deceptive with what you're doing. Because there is bluffing, because there is a poker-like aspect to this game when you're playing combat tricks, you want to make sure everyone is still having fun and that you're not being deceptive and you're not being toxic about it. People want to show up and people want to have a good time playing Commander. They do not want to be straight up lied to that you don't have a combat trick or you're not going to play a combat trick and then you play a combat trick. That will make people not want to play with you. Combat tricks can be a fun and interactive way of gameplay, and I recognize that they can also be used in a deceptive way. So make sure you're a good sport about it and make sure that you're as honest as possible. So to wrap things up, I love combat tricks in Magic the Gathering, and especially in Commander. I think they offer so many awesome choices and so many tough decisions that are required for your opponents that it just makes the game feel so alive when you're playing it. You feel like you're actively trying to push advantages, small or even big, and you're constantly trying to put together a strategy that can eventually win you the game. Sometimes combat tricks will make you win through commander damage, and other times it might just fuel the rest of your deck to be successful. Either way, combat tricks allow for so much fun, skill expressive, and interactive gameplay that I love it. This has been a video all about bluffing in Magic the Gathering. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Thank you. I'll see you guys next time.